which that's the biggest red flag you can imagine, because it means a political.
Yeah, like there's a separation between already creatively before you get involved.
Like there might be a mutiny at any point.
Exactly.
This is
The independent
filmmaker's guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
On IFG, we talk about independent film from development through delivery. By featuring discussions with creators and collaborators about their experiences, we form a roadmap to help you have the most success with your projects. One of the most impactful artists that helps create the aesthetic of a film is the director of photography. In today's episode, we talk with 3 DPs on how they work to combine technology, collaboration, and crew management to create the look and feel of a feature film.
I've heard DPs say they work on a $100 million film and they say, it's the same challenge I have every day if it was a $5 million film.
That's Helga Garul, cinematographer.
anything less than 20 days is going to be really fucking hard. Can we curse?
And that's Jendra Jarnigan, cinematographer.
I think the jump from going, especially at the beginning of the career and jumping from something like music videos or short narrative content and then getting into feature films is actually quite a difficult one.
That's cinematographer Igor Kropotov.
The jump usually comes from people that you've previously worked with, especially people that are transitioning from those music videos and the short narrative content.
I'm your host, Stephen Pierce.
Having worked with them previously, you're most likely going to get hired on their first film if you're in good connection and.
I actually don't remember how I got my first feature. It was quite a while ago, and I did not know anyone on the production team prior to getting hired. I might have had some acquaintances that referred me, but I had shot a ton of shorts. I had been out of film school for a long time. I was working as a gaffer, an electrician. I'd worked on Sex and the City and Law and Order. So I had a lot of experience, just shy of having done a feature. So I think, when I was referred and when I interviewed for that job, they could tell I was ready.
First feature I did came through the camera department. I had a little stint in the camera department through seconding and firsting, and then I was firsting a low budget feature, and they needed some second unit shots, and sure, I'll do it. And so I shot some second unit shots one day, and they came out great. So they asked me to do the next one. That was it. And in that world where not much is on the line, there aren't, you don't have the studios, or you don't have a lot of money invested from anyone there. I think it's easier to get your first job that way.
So if you could go back now and redo that first feature, what would you do differently? What do you think you could or would change?
I would probably say it's not necessarily even the creative, because, it's kind of, it's almost the experience of shooting film where you don't know what you're really going to get until you see it. It would probably be, today I would be safer.
Interesting.
Because it was a car chase, I remember, and I have, camera hanging out of the trunk. A PA is holding me so I don't fly out of the car while we're flying down some street in Palmdale with, we have a little window, there's no trucks coming crashing into us. And the guy says, hey, you might want to think about the rest of your life. It's not about this one shot. And I'm like, well, this is, so he kind of brought me back down to reality, which today I would probably do it to make sure that, I would still be here for my family at the end of the shoot day and be safe and get the best shot.
I think that the safety factor is actually is quite an important point. I think that, shooting my first feature film, we were also quite unsafe with a couple of things that we did. And I think, but, doing the first film, you're so fired up, you're so ready to just do almost whatever it takes to get that shot and, to get that footage. And you kind of, you're running on adrenaline most of the time. So you kind of forget about safety.
Jendra, was that your experience too?
No. No, I mean, I did learn those lessons early in my career. Like I remember hanging off of like a big, I don't know, like wheat silo or something, as like a sophomore in film school, like over the edge to get someone climbing up the ladder towards me. And I will identify with like you're being in the moment and you want to get the shot and you're committed to doing your best work. And so that clouds your judgment about what you're actually doing to your physical safety. The irony is I did have enough self-awareness that I would never put anyone else in that position. Like I would never ask anyone in my crew to do that. I would be more aware of what I was asking someone else to do. But my making the choice to assume the risk, I think we all have to learn that, and hopefully we learn that in retrospect, looking back, to be like, hey, that was really foolish, and not because someone got hurt.
What attracts you to a film? Like, is it the director? Is it the script? Is it both? Like, what does it take for somebody to, when they offer it to you, you're like, that I'm into?
It's a great question.
For me, I think probably for most of us, I'm going to guess, is the script. And then first and foremost, because I think you read the script before you even get a deeper, lengthy meeting with the director, unless you know them previously. You don't even necessarily know what their take on the script is until after you've read it, and then it gives you something to discuss.
I think, what Jendra was saying, I think the material kind of has to exist. It has to be on, the script, and has to be written. But I think what I'm looking for is a strong collaboration with the director and sort of like their vision. It's sometimes it's tough because, people are sort of looking to just, hire a sort of like a camera person that can execute something, in a traditional way. But I think, sometimes, with the script and your team, you can find a way to execute it in a more interesting kind of visual way. And I think that's what I think I look for, and that's what attracts me.
When you see an indie film script come across, what's a red flag to you? Something that you're immediately like, I'm not sure this is going to be for me.
Yeah, the interview that you go, usually it's with producers, a director, or whoever is, because I remember doing one and they even asked me, it's like, so this is all great, we love you to do it, and what happens when the shit hits the fan? What do you do? Things break apart, and people are running around, and what's your MO? And I said, well, I just look up in the sky and take a deep breath and smile. And they loved that, and I got the job. Great. And it turns out the tables turned, and they turned out to be the crazy people on the job, where it was, so there's, I think, being able to read into the situation looking forward is key. That's why people work with each other again and again, I think, because they know what they're going to get, and you can plan for it, right? I don't think it's necessarily indie. That doesn't necessarily, it's just indie. It's across the whole platform. I mean, even I've heard DPs say they work on $100 million film, and they say it's the same challenge I have every day if it was a $5 million film. The time of day, the location, the actors' schedule. And so in a way, indie is not that different in a lot of aspects. It's just maybe smaller scale, and it really depends on the project.
I have learned like that the interview is not about trying to sell, trying to get the job at any cost, or say what you think that they want to hear to get the job. It is a mutual feeling out of like, yeah, are you a good match? And if someone hires me to do something that is completely against my aesthetics, my beliefs, my creative instincts, then I'm going to spend the whole time trying to please them and not be true to myself or my own vision. I mean, I do think it is our job as DPs to be chameleons and to align our vision with the director, but you have to believe in their vision.
How much do you expect the director to bring in? How much does that turn you off? Like, how much control do you want to have? And it might be different for each project, but what's the collaboration factor like for you with the director?
On this one project, I remember great interview, and afterwards, there were 3 producers on the project, which also is a red flag, big red flag. So 2 of them were asking, or kind of taking me to the side after and said, "Hey, so it is the director's first film, so we do need your help, and we got to help her out a little bit and tug and pull here and there," which that's the biggest red flag you can imagine, because it means a political a minefield.
Yeah, like there's a separation between already creatively before you get involved.
Like there might be a mutiny at any point.
Oh, exactly. And sure enough, it was the script supervisor, I think, turned into the director most of the time. It was so that was a good learning curve to see that red flag and then act on it. Even there might be great elements, but it's hard to sometimes see the red flags and act on them properly. That's the tough part, I think.
Do you like directors that bring in like everything fully prepped? They know the style they want to shoot it. They have really, really strong visions about the lighting and the composition and the way they wanted the camera to move? Or do you like somebody to come in with a more idea of performance and story and let you plug in?
Yeah, I think I've collaborated with directors that have a little bit of both. There's a director I work with quite frequently who has a very strong theater background, and I've done many projects with him at this point, and I think a lot of his focus when we're filming goes towards the actors and how to get the best performance out of them, and leaving most of the visuals to me at that point, which has worked well in the past. And I think that I generally do my best work that way. Everything is planned ahead of time. There's a whole shot list for the feature film, but it's so there's some sway and adaptation as any day on set goes. But it's always, creating the movement and the blocking with the actors, and then allowing the camera to sort of play with that. But it's also very nice when when directors will, have a clear vision and, the direction that they want to go, especially how the piece is going to be edited. That's a huge help, because sometimes people will lean very hard on you to make those decisions. And that's where it becomes tricky, because it's tough to make those decisions for somebody else.
Yeah, but so even in that realm though, like even if they have a good staging and they know the way they want to do it, do you always have enough time on an indie feature to really get to play with what it wants to fully be?
No, I mean, it can be, you can run through a scene with a director and they say, well, this character goes here, and then the other one goes over there, and then the third character goes that way, and then all of a sudden they're all spread out all over the room, and they're facing different directions, and all of a sudden this 15 shots that you were going to do is now somehow turning into 40, because all of a sudden you're trying to figure out where to place camera to grab each person's reactions, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the point where you kind of step in and you go back and, go back to the scale of what you're actually doing and the scale of the project, and have to step in and be like, listen, we need to scale this back. Otherwise we're never going to make our day. Sometimes you have to do that. And that's, and then that's where the AD and everybody comes in and helps facilitate that.
And oftentimes, because of the schedule, and, we're all fighting the schedule, that if you're trying to do something bold and visual, you want to be in alignment with the director, that the producers and the ADs are going to allow the time and respect the prioritization of time that is what the director wants, versus you're actually kind of trying to fight against that, where you're trying to fight for the time that you need to get the shots the way that you want them, where you're, I don't want to say operating in a vacuum. Hopefully your director trusts you and has your back. But if it's coming from the director, then the producers, the AD, everyone respects that. If it's coming from the DP and the director doesn't really seem to care that much, then you're I think it's more of an uphill battle to execute the kinds of shots, the kinds of lighting, the kind of coverage, whatever it is that you're trying to impart for the visual style of the movie.
If you're making a micro budget feature, or you're making a, more typical indie budget feature, so something that's like, sub $500,000 and something that's more in the $1 to $3 million range, what are some schedules that you have done that have you deemed been successful, and what was good, and then some that failed? You know what I mean? Like, have you done have you tried to do the 18-day feature, the 15-day feature, and it totally fail? Have you ever had the luxury of doing a 28, 35-day shoot? You know what I mean? Like, and what was the difference?
I did a film that was quite big for how small the budget was. We had a lot of stunts, a lot of action, and the principal cast was a group of 7 people. And I think we only had 20 days to shoot. But there were days where, where it was very deflating, to make it to the end of the day and just feel like you hadn't been able to live up to the potential that this movie deserved because of the circumstances of the schedule and the inability to budge on that.
I think any project, time is the biggest asset that one can ask for and one can have. Just a little more time. If it's scheduled as an 18-day film, you walk away and think, man, 20 days would have been perfect. Or, if it's a 20-day film, 25 would have been perfect, and so on and so forth. And, a poorly scheduled film puts a lot of unneeded pressure on production and especially the cinematographer. And you constantly feel like you're rushed and you compromise a lot. And, I think ultimately it damages the work and damages the film in the very end. And, so that's one of the things that I always try and push more for. But I do think that there are ways to mitigate a schedule for a film. I mean, depends what kind of film you're trying to make. If you're trying to make an action film and then you have only 18 days, that's quite a difficult task to achieve. If it's a lot of sitting down dinner conversations and you're shooting 3 pages a day for 18 days, then you can do that. So it really depends on the type of project. I would say the plague with indie films, the indie film pandemic, is not having enough days to do the proper work that you'd want to do.
So how much prep for an indie film do you need versus,
more.
Again,
more.
Exactly.
The answer is always more.
So what do you feel like you must, I guess, rather than viewing it as days, how does it work? Like, if you hired on as an indie film DP, are you hired for a set amount of days, or you hired for a set amount of like prep weeks, or like a set amount for your prep? Like, how do you guys do that?
I would say a week. I'm just going to throw that out there. A productive prep for a week. And I think also would be important to have the crew on as much as possible. To have your keys on as early as possible is a huge help. To have a gaffer, the AC, and the grip come on as early as possible, I think it's a huge plus. But otherwise, it would also, I think, depend on the creative approach of the film. I would say, out of one experience I had, I think it was about a week of prep, but no keys, no crew, which was not productive whatsoever. So they would literally, the first shoot day, they don't even know what's up and down and left and right. So I think to have everybody on the same page before you start shooting is an important step.
I've definitely done prep, which is about 2 weeks, but I usually try to push for about 3 or 4 weeks of prep. And the last couple of larger projects that I did, we were able to work out of an office space with the rest of the production team, and kind of gives you access to everybody there at the same time. The assistant director is doing the scheduling in the other room, and then you work with the director on the shot list, and you kind of have your keys at the disposal as well. And I think location scouting and seeing locations that do work and then some that don't work is also a huge factor in in that.
If someone tried to hire me for a feature and only had 1 week of prep, I would turn it down. I cannot work that way. I have the norm seems to be that you get paid for 3 weeks of prep. And then a lot of DPs, are, of course, you're committed to anything that you're putting your energy towards. So you end up putting in more sort of unpaid prep or soft prep or pre-prep prior to when your paid prep starts. So that like 3 weeks out is the full steam ahead, the entire production, the line producer, the production designer, like everybody. Anything less than 3 weeks, I feel like 3 weeks is not enough. I would like to have 4 or 5. I realize that that's not always possible, but that would be more satisfying to me. On top of that, I would love to have the lead time to know that I'm hired, that I'm going to be starting prep. Prep starts, or paid prep starts on X date. But that I know I'm going to be doing that movie so that I can start to not just get my affairs in order, to be ready to be fully present and committed with no other distractions in my life for that period of time, that I can get all that shit out of the way. But I want to start that relationship with that director in our free time, the unpaid prep, the soft prep. Like, we watch movies together, we start looking at visual references, we have discussions about who we are as people, what our preferences are, like just getting to know each other on a human level. There's no time for that once you're in that 3 week, full steam ahead go. And that's something that I've felt was missing on films when I just got hired at, like, you start on Monday, like prep starts on Monday. It's like, shit, I wish I had time before we were scouting locations to get to know this director better.
What have you seen and what have you found like you could do your job with? And then what do you want, like as far as lighting package? Whenever you get a lighting package and they say this, I'm like, shit. Whenever I get a lighting package and they say this, I'm like, okay. And how much involvement do you get in picking it usually?
I think one of the things that I try to really avoid is sort of some productions will try and push to almost have you do a daily breakdown of the lights that you're going to need on that specific day. It's sort of, if it's something specific, like you're doing something large and you need really big units on a certain day, then you can book them for, day 19 or 18 of shooting. But it's really, really difficult to sort of, especially when you're in it and when you're filming, you're not going to remember that you need, those 10K HMIs tomorrow, but that's when like a good gaffer and good keys will sort of, have that coming up, and they'll be aware of the schedule and they'll have those units available. But I think that having a strong, lighting package that you have at your disposal the whole time is really important. And you might have sky panels one day and then not have them the next day is a little bit of a monkey wrench at that point, because the producers wanted to pay them because you get used to it, and then you rely on those units, and you have to remember at a certain point that these are all the units that you have, and not second guess what you do have in the truck or not. The one thing about feature films that I always, kind of continuously remember as I'm working on them is that there's so much flux while you're filming it. If you don't finish a scene one day and you're still at the location, you're in the location 3 days later, you're going to pick up that scene 3 days later. But not having those units 3 days later because they got returned makes it a huge problem, I think.
I would agree with that, in that just like everything about being a DP, you need to choose your battles and you need to think towards what's efficient. So I would pick a base lighting package that is flexible enough to cover most of the scenarios that we're planning on encountering throughout the shoot. And then, like Igor said, if you have, some outlier setup, like some location that requires a large quantity of things that it doesn't make sense to carry that full time, or some bigger units that are too expensive to carry full time, then you would day play that gear for those particular scenes or those particular days. But otherwise, I'm looking for stuff that, nowadays with the sensitivity of the camera, stuff that can plug into the wall. primarily, that we're not necessarily carrying on a small film. We're not necessarily carrying big generators full time. We're only getting those when absolutely necessary. LED lights are more expensive, but they're very versatile and flexible, so that you got to figure, like, I probably want at least a handful of these because of, how fast they can be, how versatile they can be, that they're worth paying for, one sky panel S60 and one set of quasars or something. But like, you can't afford all of the LEDs all of the time because they cost too much.
So how much does a location play a part? Like whenever you're like, as far as like found light and time of day, and when you pull that together, how much are you taking that into account, assuming that you're going to have this base lighting package that's going to kind of Swiss Army knife most everything?
I think that's the location is the biggest item of all. It can replace your lighting completely. So, and especially, I always ask what post budget they have and how much post there is going to be. That also will influence my lighting style. The Revenant is a great example. I mean, it's a $150 million movie, but still, every single face was rotoscoped in that film for the DI, and it looked like it was. Some of the exterior scenes were lit because of it, but they weren't. It was just a high-end, very expensive DI process. And so I think if you know your post, and if it's going to be even hopefully a DI artist that and you know what they can achieve, I think you can adjust your lighting accordingly, and you can get away with more stuff.
I've learned that also, like for myself, like with the things I've directed, that if you pick the right location, you just saved so much effort. Like you now have your art, your production design, like all of it has something to hang on rather than trying to force things and build it, because it's just too much construction for an indie film.
I always try and remind people when we're assessing locations, like let's say you have choice A or choice B, it's like you got to look at the creative concerns, the practical concerns, and the financial concerns. Like, okay, this location costs more, but we don't need a pre-light. Or this location is cheap, but we are going to need, 3 additional man days, a swing truck worth of additional lights. You're going to have to paint it. You're going to have to rent it for longer. Like a lot of times there's so many factors that go into the location selection, and it all comes down to cost. But I think it's important, that's part of our job. Like we're not directly responsible for the budget, but we have to say, like, this is what it's going to take to shoot in this space. And it's like we either have allotted for, a little money set aside for day player gear and manpower, and this location is going to burn it all up, or you're going to need to allocate more, or like take that out of your location fee because this is smaller, or sometimes I've even volunteered to give up some money in my lighting budget to give it to the art department because I know that they're out of money and I don't want to shoot some ugly fucking space that is going to be a pain in my ass. Like,
so camera and lenses, when you're picking your camera, is there a brand you prefer to? Do you go through how you're going to rig it and what it's going on? Like, do you feel it's always necessary to shoot like Airy Raw or Red, R3D, or will you sometimes pop down into ProRes Quad 4, 422 HQ? And also, do you ever shoot on cameras that end up with an H.264 wrapper?
I think that, there's a lot of really good cameras on the market. And I think that if you really know how to use lighting and composition to your advantage, you can't really just be, stuck up on the best camera on the market, because if it's going to break the budget completely of the film, and, if it's going to take away money from the art department and from the locations, it doesn't matter if you're shooting, on the newest, coolest thing with the best lenses out there, because it's not sufficient enough to make a film. And it's not going to make your work necessarily appear good. So I think there's a lot of factors to consider, with indie filmmaking, and what, whether it's one expensive camera, or you're going to be better off having 2 cheaper cameras, but make the day and have more coverage and, and succeed really.
I agree with that. I think, it's important to take a right tool for the job approach, and that part of our job as DPs is to know the strengths and weaknesses of the various camera systems, so that when we look towards, okay, this project has these parameters, these are my priorities, either this camera or that camera is going to be the best choice for that. Or if we can't afford that because we're getting a really good deal from this rental house, but they're like, okay, well, we're out of Alexas, but we can give you a red, or we can give you 2 reds, but we only have one of the, and to be, to know when it's worth being flexible, to be like, all right, if we're going to get a really good deal on that, then I can get the lenses that I want, or I can get, another electrician, or, it's again, choosing your battles. But I'm not a camera specific person. I'm more of a flexible person, and I would use and have used a Fuji X-T3 or a Sony A7S as an insert camera for a certain situation. I had to get really low underneath someone in a music video, so I used my Sony X-T3 with an external recorder instead of having to build. I was shooting on a Venice, so I would have had to have built the platform way bigger to accommodate the bigger camera. So it's just why don't I just get a little tiny camera and get under there? And the colorists couldn't tell the difference. So you need to know when you can get away with that kind of stuff and when you can't.
I did this film in Puerto Rico, and initially we thought Alexas, and it was when the Alexa M was still, the great handheld camera, and the production came back with an argument saying that, well, anything that's on the island, we're going to get a 90% tax credit. So there goes anything that's not available on the island is basically out of the running, because I was saying, hey, I have this great relationship with this camera house in New York, they can ship it. And they're like, well, 90% tax credit, is that going to be applied? No. So we ended up using whatever the local cameras had. And, you adjust, and it turned out great. And you find your creative angle within those challenges, and everybody was happy in the end.
Are you looking at aperture whenever you go into an indie film? Are you looking for something that's going to have a prime that's 1.4, 1.2, or are you cool with zooms? Because there's a cost factor to each of those.
I think you have to look for lenses that are, that sort of speak to the character of the project, and, accentuate the story that you're trying to tell. And I would say lenses are single-handedly perhaps the most important thing. And if you can exchange a more expensive camera system for a cheaper one, but get better optics, that is definitely an avenue that I feel a lot of us end up going, when people start squeezing for budget. So yeah, I think lenses are extremely important.
I think that you can almost get lost in it, but it's weird. I go both ways, where sometimes I go down that road and it feels great, and I'm not sure how many people feel it later. And other times I find myself shooting it deeper focus, maybe more middle of the road, crisp and modern, you could say. And it works as well, So it's I think you can go any way, and it all works. I think it just depends on what your creative space is at the moment.
I think that the people being obsessed with lenses the last few years is kind of overrated. I think that the differences between various lenses can be incredibly subtle. And I think that people putting all of their attention on that is not necessarily the right place for certain projects for you to put your energy. At least for me, I have some projects where the lenses were incredibly important to me, and those are usually projects where the lenses are really weird. I'm kind of go big or go home in that regard. If you're not doing something with lenses that are completely strange and out there, then all the other ones are kind of very similar. So it's the difference between shooting on super speeds versus Cooke S4s versus master primes. It's like, I don't know that many people are going to see the difference unless you are doing something very stylized with lens flares. Then the kind of flare that you get from those different lenses are very distinctive. But if it's not a flary movie, or like my last film, I used really obscure vintage anamorphics called Crystal Express from either the 60s or the 70s, because they looked really strange, and I wanted a really strange look. But otherwise, I think the attention that you put into lighting, into production design, into camera movement, into composition has a much bigger stamp on your visual story than the subtle differences between one flavor of lenses or another.
I think, and just to add on that, I think that there's a different set of factors to consider when you're doing a feature film or an indie film than your commercial work or your music video work, because ultimately that image that you're capturing is hopefully going to end up on a big screen, and everything on a theatrical screen that is 40 feet or whatever looks very different than it does in your computer. So, picking lenses that have a lot of character, like the Lomo anamorphics, and you love shooting them close to wide open, you put that up on a big theater screen, and those they completely fall apart. But they do work for something like Vimeo, or something that people are going to consume either on their phones or on the computer. So, and I think that different projects call for different lenses, not just through aesthetics as well, but sometimes they want sharper lenses for computer graphics, and you have to shoot those, like an f8, f11, or even higher, just so they can make those adjustments and comp stuff in.
What are your websites or IG handles if people wanted to follow you? And what are you working on next?
My website, helgegerull.com, which is HelgeGerull.com. And actually, my Instagram handle is a lot of fun. I do a lot of still photography as well for Twitcher, which is Helge Gerull Photo. It's hashtag Helge Gerull Photo. It's HelgeGerull Photo. And a lot of fun stuff there.
My website is jendrajarnagin.com, JendraJarnagin. And my Instagram is JendraDP.
You can find me on just igorkropotov.com, and it's the same name for my Instagram handle.
I always love when we get to talk to cinematographers.
Yeah, me too.
Both on set and off. Just usually makes for a great conversation, to be honest. What were some of your takeaways?
Well, I mean, obviously location is a huge thing. I think that's across the board, all departments and any kind of thing, whatever you're working with. But I really loved how Helge was talking about, being able to use found light in a location to replace lighting package, because I feel like that's going to be something that's always, you're always going to want more. You want to want more lights. You're going to want more time. You're going to want more crew. And that seems like if you get a nice location that has nice lighting in it, that's a great takeaway, that can be a lot of work for you and save you a lot of money.
It kind of leads me to one of my big takeaways, which is something I am continuing to learn every time I work with DPs on set, is just the communication with them about the lighting package. I thought Igor gave a great perspective on that, where he was talking about needing, certain lighting instruments. If they don't finish a scene and they're in that same location, they can go to film, do pickups of that scene a few days later. But if they don't have the same lights there, now they can't do that. And that's an ongoing issue, I think, between DPs who need what they need and producers who are trying to always work or usually work towards a budget. And
I mean, what else are you going to do?
Features.
You know what I mean? Whenever you say, here's a block of money, we're going to make a movie, that block of money has to go 1,000 different places. So I totally get it. I get both sides. But also, I liked how Jendra was saying, and I've heard a lot of other indie DPs say this about having an S60 Sky panel as being the workhorse. And those, they really are. They're big. They're a 2K output. They're real soft light. You can use them on anything. They can be color washes, and then get in a couple of quasars and stuff. That's exactly what I was kind of expecting as far as an indie package goes, right? And then you kind of supplement with tungsten lights, which are great, but they are hot. They require a lot of power. So you may not always have the power to do it because you may not always have a generator truck. You might be shooting in a garage or, whatever. So that's what I really took away, is that also with that lighting package, having stuff that you can keep the whole time, not trying to piece out day by day, but get a package that you can get familiar with, you can use the whole time, and can be versatile enough to do what you need to do.
And with whatever it is, whether it's stuff you're going to have the whole time or it's special instruments that you're going to have just for certain days, just to communicate all that ahead of time during the prep time, figure it out, communicate with your cinematographer about what you're going to have, when you're going to have it. Same thing with the gear. Helga spoke to shooting in Puerto Rico and them getting a big tax credit on anything they rent on the island.
Right.
And him saying, I want to use this other thing I can get a good deal on. And them saying, well, is it as good of a deal we can get as we're going to get if we rent it on the island? And him saying, no, and so he just had to figure it out with what they had there. So whatever it is, I think the big takeaway, which is often the case, is communication
and prep.
Top.
And prep. Yeah, exactly
Prep.
what you're saying. Prep.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. The first 10 commenters are immediately entered to win a monthly prize. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about the future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more information about today's guest, visit us at frameworkfilm.com for visuals, diagrams, and more. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
Hi, I'm Chris Barron, a filmmaker from Denver, Colorado, and I'm reading the credits. IFG is produced by Framework Productions and directed by James Allerdyce. It's produced by Matt Mundy, edited by Audrey Rae McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. Thanks for listening.